key facts are clear and compel me to support the articles of impeachment. First, President Trump attempted to pressure a foreign government to help his re-election campaign. And second, the president used the powers of his office again to obstruct a congressional investigation into that wrongdoing. The president has falsely claimed he has been denied the chance to defend himself, but at the same time he is preventing the testimony of witnesses with direct knowledge of the events under investigation. If the president were innocent, as he claims, surely these witnesses would be able to testify to that. If there had been no quid pro quo, these witnesses could say that. If aid to Ukraine were not intentionally delayed for improper purposes, they could surely testify to that also. But rather than giving these witnesses the chance to speak, the president has silenced them. The president has silenced witnesses at the Defense Department. The president has silenced witnesses at the State Department. The president has silenced witnesses at the White House. He even silenced the loquacious Mick Mulvaney, who uttered at a press conference that there was a quid pro quo and get over it. By choosing to block this testimony, the president is not proving his innocence. He's just proving he's afraid of what they have to say. As a wise man once said, the truth will come to light, and it has. It is our duty to act on it. I yield back.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a shame on the floor of this House when you accuse somebody and then make them prove they're not guilty of what you're accusing of. That's a bad look. 30 seconds to the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Rose.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, today I rise in strong opposition to this partisan impeachment spectacle that just seeks to accomplish what President Trump's opponents failed to do at the ballot box in 2016. Our votes today are merely formalizing the decision my colleagues on the other side of the aisle reached 3 years ago. This process has been an embarrassment to our country, an insult to our Constitution, and a distraction from the real work we should be accomplishing for the American people. I stand with the people of Tennessee's 6th District in strongly supporting President Trump, and I will vote against the articles of impeachment before us today. Thank you.
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Georgia.
Madam Speaker, I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Huizinga.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
In her own words, Speaker Pelosi said impeachment must be compelling, overwhelming, and bipartisan. These articles of impeachment being considered today by the House fail to meet Speaker Pelosi's own standards. Process matters, folks. Representing a good chunk of Gerald Ford's old district and being a staffer during the Clinton administration, I have an intimate understanding of the effects of impeachment on this nation. I'm stunned to see my Democrat colleagues whitewash, or maybe I should say whitewater, Bill Clinton's cooperation with the House of Representatives. That is not exactly what was going on. And this is the most partisan impeachment that we have seen in our nation's history. And I yield back.
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I continue to reserve.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Cloud.
Gentleman's recognized.
It's been very clear from the beginning that this impeachment proceeding has never been about an honest search for the truth. If it were, our Democratic friends would not have polled to see what to charge the president with. Calling an opinion a fact does not make it so, and repeating it over and over does not make it more true. When one produces a committee report with fabricated findings based on no fact and witnesses and then quote from it like it's authoritative, it's no more valid than having a campaign pay for a foreign entity to create a fraudulent dossier and then selling it to a FISA court in order to spy on a campaign. This has always been a verdict in search of a crime, an impeachment birthed out of a resistance movement. It's time to end this charade and get back to doing the work we were elected to do.
Madam Speaker, I continue to reserve.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Fulcher.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In a day heavy in verbal debate, I choose to use my time to enumerate in detail every high crime and misdemeanor committed by the President of the United States. I will do so now.
Gentleman's time's expired.
Yield back.
Gentleman from California. Gentleman reserve.
Madam Speaker, I continue to reserve.
Thank
Gentleman
you.
from Georgia.
Madam Speaker, I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Fleshman.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, in my 30 seconds, my heart aches for our great republic today. I implore my Democratic colleagues in this House, we're not Republicans or Democrats, we are Americans. This is not the right place. This is not the right procedure. Settle our political differences politically. We owe the American people a great duty to come together. Don't give the Senate the victory lap. Give the House the victory lap. Vote no to impeach. We owe it to the American people. They want so dearly for us to come together for our great republic and thank our great president. Thank you. I yield back.
And members are reminded to address their remarks to the chair. Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I continue to reserve.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. While we get to catch our breath, could you give us the time for both the
You bet.
majority and the minority?
It has 43 minutes. Gentleman from California has 29 minutes. Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate that. I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Waltz.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, I'm a Green Beret and a proud veteran, but this process does not make me proud. I've fought all over the world, from Africa to Afghanistan, and seen fairer and more transparent processes than this. Since the Democrats lost the election in 2016, they've been focused on impeaching this president. Meanwhile, we have not solved the problems America entrusted us to solve: immigration, health care, infrastructure. Nothing in President Trump's call rises to the level of high crimes and misdemeanors worthy of impeachment. For that reason, I'll be voting against impeachment
Gentleman from
today.
California. Continues to reserve.
Yes, Madam Speaker.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Guthrie.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today in opposition to the articles of impeachment on President Trump. My Democratic colleagues have been planning to impeach President Trump since he took office. After months of wasting House time on partisan investigations, they've been unable to produce evidence that President Trump committed a crime. I will vote no on today's articles of impeachment. I look forward to getting back to the business on behalf of Kentuckians. I yield back.
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I'm proud to recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Maloney, for 2 minutes.
Gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Speaker, the facts and the evidence establish beyond peradventure that the President abused the power of his office for personal gain and sought to cover up his misconduct by obstructing the Congress. What we do today goes to the heart of the oath we take to support and defend the Constitution. These actions are as necessary as they are heartbreaking. It is the President, not any member of this House, who has brought us to this sad place. His actions echo in this chamber, and like a tin can tied to his leg, will rattle behind him through the pages of history. For in the final analysis, none of us will escape the truth. It will come for us all in this world or the next. What is the truth? The President used taxpayer money and official acts to pressure a foreign government to help him win re-election by slandering a fellow American. How do we know this truth? We know because brave Americans, soldiers, and public servants came forward to reveal the President's misconduct. And the President, he continues to undertake an unprecedented cover-up to stonewall the public and obstruct their representatives in Congress. He withholds access to documents and records belonging to the public that would further establish his mendacity. He blocks his advisors and associates from testifying before the public to conceal the wrongs they witnessed. His actions are unworthy of the presidency. Today is about right and wrong and whether we still know the difference. Today we hold the President accountable. If we failed to do so, future presidents would see corruption as without consequence. And there, our democracy goes to die. We inherit this republic from our ancestors and we borrow it from our children. With humility, we pray that the history of this day will guide us to a better future for our nation. I yield back.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Long.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And we have never, ever in the history of this country seen a presidency like this one. Once the president was sworn in, 19 minutes later, the Washington Post said impeachment begins today. 1 million women marched the next day on Washington. Bank of America, Starbucks, both that supported Hillary Clinton, had their windows broken out here in Washington because people were so upset that this man was elected president of the United States. He's had his head held underwater for almost 3 years now, never coming up for a breath of air. Just keep pushing him down. Lowest black unemployment ever, lowest Hispanic unemployment ever, highest stock market ever, the very lowest unemployment in years. And
Gentleman from
reserve
California.
the balance of my time.
I yield back.
Reserves?
Yes.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Madam Speaker, I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Fortenberry.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have been concerned since the beginning of this impeachment process that it has been driven by a predetermined guilty verdict. It's unfair, it's wrong, and now every future president, Democrat or Republican, will have to worry that the impeachment process will be driven as a blunt force political instrument. It's been said that this day is sad. It's not sad, it's regrettable, but this day will end shortly. The House has had its cathartic moment. Tomorrow will begin a new day. Let's get back to work. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, we continue to reserve.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from California, Mr. LaMalfa.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Ready, fire, aim. What we're hearing today are made-up articles to fit an ever-shrinking impeachment foothold. George Washington could be impeached under this criteria. Democrats believe they are saving our democracy with these hysterical made-up charges, which is odd because we're a republic, not a democracy, as they keep insisting. No one came to Congress to impeach, we hear. Several new and returning members have come specifically to impeach President Trump. I hear a lot today about sadness and solemnity. From impeachment? No, because their candidate lost in 2016. The American people chose Donald J. Trump to lead us into prosperity, not a socialist government. We will survive this day, but I call upon the American people to see through this sham and live to hear speaking
Speaker,
the
we
truth.
reserve the balance of our
Gentleman
time.
reserves. Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Adderholt.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Johnson from South Dakota, I yield 30 seconds.
Mr. Johnson's recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, I'm voting no. Impeachment is not in the best interest of this country, and in fact, it has only deepened the partisan divide that truly plagues this country. When the sun comes up tomorrow, I pray with all my heart that the anger and the division in this chamber will give way to an honorableness and a productivity and a time of working together. I yield back.
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I reserve.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As this air traffic controller is getting them lined for a landing, let's go back to Mr. Adderholt. 30 seconds from the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Adderholt.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Today, a duly elected president has been impeached by the House of Representatives by the Democrats, compelled by partisanship and not by the facts. I'm proud to stand here with President Donald Trump, and I plan to cast my vote against both articles of impeachment. It's not that the president abuses power. It is my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who are abusing one of the most powerful tools that's been entrusted to the Congress in the Constitution by our founding fathers. Twisting the Constitution to impeach a president
time's expired.
you fear will be...
California.
Madam Speaker, we continue to reserve.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Madam Speaker, this time I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Olson.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, Webster's dictionary defines the Star Chamber as, quote, characterized by secrecy and often being irresponsibly arbitrary and oppressive. Sadly, my Democrat friends have turned this chamber, the People's Chamber, into the Star Chamber of the people. One great example. The most important duty we can do as members is declare war. Next one is to impeach a president.
We're hoping Republicans to have every member stand up and vote, like for Speaker, say their vote loudly. That's been denied. CNN has been denied. I yield back. This is a sham.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Gentleman, thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you. Thank the ranking member. Thank you, Madam Speaker. And while this institution should rightfully ensure that the law is faithfully executed by the administrative branch, this exercise has shown itself to be the ultimate manipulation in order to achieve political gain. I caution my colleagues who have placed political expediency ahead of moderation. Their votes later today will forever change this institution. Imagine a future where this body utilizes the most severe of its constitutional tools to continually put the oppositional party on trial. And with that, I yield back.
California.
Madam Speaker, it's my pleasure to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Brown.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, when I was commissioned as Second Lieutenant in the United States Army, I swore an oath to support and defend the Constitution, and I've done so 13 times in my 35 years of public service. That oath means everything: to serve and fight for our country, to protect and promote our values. Yet President Trump betrayed his oath. He abused his power, the immense power of the presidency. He threatened our elections by inviting foreign interference. He chose investigating a political rival over defending our national security. So today, we must use our power, the extraordinary power endowed by our Constitution and entrusted by the people, the power to impeach. We must hold President Trump accountable, or else we will be complicit in undermining our democracy, our security, and our dignity. His conduct demonstrates his unfitness to serve as Commander-in-Chief and warrants removal from office. The oath I took as a member of Congress is the same I took as a soldier, an oath that reminds me values matter, duty, honor, and the rule of law matter. To keep my oath to the people I serve and the country I love, today I will vote to impeach the President of the United States. I yield back.
Madam Speaker, I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. LaHood.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I've said from the beginning of this process, impeachment is and should be the nuclear option, reserved for the most treasonous activity and the most serious activity. Clearly, that has been not met here. As I've reviewed the facts and evidence as a former federal prosecutor, I've read the transcripts, I've watched the hearings, I've read the whistleblower report. That has not been met here. In addition, this process has lacked fairness, due process, and transparency. We shouldn't be here tonight doing this. This is a travesty.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of our time.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Harris.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, it's unbelievable. The few Americans that are going to be watching this, because they know what the outcome is. We all know what the outcome is. They're wondering why are we trying to negate the vote of 63 million Americans instead of talking about the things that Americans care about. Prescription drug coverage, the high cost of prescription drugs, the high cost of health care, securing our borders, keeping our economy going. These are the things we should be talking about. No, instead, we're going to pass this resolution tonight and then go home for Christmas vacation instead of doing the job of America. I yield back.
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, we continue to reserve.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Hawkins.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, I was a political newcomer before this, and just like President Trump, perhaps like me, he was naive to think that this House, that in the people's House, everybody was true and just. It's not the case. Democrats weren't saddened by this solemn day. They weren't waiting for all the evidence. This was always about politics, because they loathe the president, because he didn't play by their Beltway rules. I should have known. But the fact is, Kansas is better, the U.S. is better, and the world is better because of Donald Trump.
Gentleman's time's expired. Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, we continue to reserve.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from California, Mr. Calvert.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My friends on the other side of the aisle have been clamoring for this day since President Trump was elected. The refusal to accept The election results and later the findings of the Mueller investigation have brought forth articles of impeachment that are negated by two simple facts. Namely, the military aid to Ukraine was provided and no investigation was ever started. The real offense is that the president won the election, and their fear is that he'll win again despite all their efforts. I will vote against the partisan attempt to overturn an election. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I continue to reserve the balance of our time.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Burchett.
Gentleman is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in opposition to impeachment against President Donald Trump. This is based on hearsay that were made by partisan witness behind closed doors. This impeachment is a sham, Madam Speaker, and has divided this country. Congress has wasted time on this impeachment and would have been better used on addressing issues that are facing Americans, like securing our southern border, the opioid epidemic, or establishing a constitutionally mandated budget. And now American workers have to wait until the Senate trial to pass the USMCA that the President and the House Republicans have been working on for over a year. I'm disappointed in the path Congress chose to go down, Madam Speaker. And for the record, Madam Speaker, I think you're doing a wonderful job.
Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of our time.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Gosar.
Gentleman is recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Ms. Speaker. It's obvious today that there's an intense hatred from the Democrats of President Donald Trump. Why do they hate the man so much? Maybe it's because of the out-of-control government gone wild, the abuses of FISA, the abuses by the FBI, the abuses in the State Department. Many of these, maybe it's just the previous administration they're trying to cover up. It's sad. This is a shameful act of what we're doing today. Shame on the Democrats. Shame on pursuing this. I ask everybody to vote no and to take notice of who votes for these articles of impeachment.
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Posey.
Gentleman is recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is a sad day for America. We know this impeachment is a sham. They know this impeachment is a sham. They know we know this impeachment is a sham. And they know that most of the American people know that this impeachment is a shameful sham. We know that it began the moment the president was elected, long before he ever had a telephone call with any foreign leaders. We've heard the numerous quotations from them that validate those very points. And yet they persist in trying to overturn the duly elected president of the United States of America's election. When the president calls for
Gentleman
an
from California.
Madam Speaker, I've heard several of my colleagues in a row now, and it's interesting to see how very few of them want to address any of the facts of the president's misconduct, nor do they wish to defend, nor do they wish, apparently, Madam Speaker, I've struck a nerve, nor do they wish to defend a president who would extort an ally, withhold military aid to help him cheat in an election. They don't want to defend that conduct. So instead they say, oh, Democrats really want to impeach the president, or Democrats don't like the president. But what they can't say is that this president's conduct was ethical. What they can't say was that this president's conduct was legal. What they can't say was this president's conduct was constitutional. What they can't say is this president has upheld his oath of office. No, they can't say that. All they can say is, we don't like the process, or our colleagues are just too happy to impeach, or it's overturning the will of the public when it's a Republican president. Interestingly, my colleagues who supported the impeachment of Bill Clinton did not think it was overturning the will of people. Apparently, this impeachment provision only overturns the will of the people if it's a Republican president. I would like to give them more credit than that. What is the distinction here is the seriousness of the conduct. This remedy was put in the Constitution for a reason. It's not an unconstitutional remedy. It is part of the Constitution. The only way you can conceive of this remedy as being unconstitutional is if you believe, as the president does, that he is the state, that anything that opposes him opposes the state, is by definition anti-constitutional. But that, of course, is nonsense. But it is more than nonsense. It is dangerous nonsense. Madam Speaker, I'm proud to recognize the gentlewoman from Washington, Ms. Schreier, for 1 minute.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, the people of Washington's 8th District sent me to Congress to fight for their families and make thoughtful, evidence-based decisions. I did not come to Congress to impeach a president, but evidence is evidence, and a balance of powers is fundamental to our democracy. On my first day in office, like everybody else here, I took an oath to uphold the Constitution and protect our country. History will judge this moment. Given all the facts before us, impeachment is the only remedy. I yield back.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm sure it did strike a chord with the chairman since, he showed up a little late, hadn't heard all the arguments. We beat the facts back all the time. It is the majority side that had to run through this. That clock and that calendar are killing him, and it's killing him because his arguments are falling flat. And to speak of evidence, yeah, we looked at the evidence. The evidence doesn't fit anything. And by the way, if he had extortion, put it in articles. He can't because he can't make the case. He can only put it in his notes and then come to the mic when he can't be questioned and talk about it. That's the problem, and that's the chord that's been struck. With that, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from North Dakota, Mr. Armstrong.
Gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Once President Trump was sworn in, articles of impeachment were introduced almost immediately. In 3 years, House Democrats have introduced 10 resolutions, gaining support of over 100 of their members, and all of that before a July 25th phone call. But also during that time, the Russia conspiracy hoax was exposed. Obstruction of justice charges were abandoned after the Mueller hearings fell flat. So after 2 years, 19 lawyers, 40 agents, 2,800 subpoenas, 500 warrants, and 17 lies in a FISA warrant application, they had nothing to show for it. Undeterred by the facts and uninterested in governing, the beat marched on. So here we are today. We have no quid pro quo, no bribery, no extortion, no crimes alleged in the articles at all. But don't worry, because we have a brand new 632-page report alleging all kinds of things, some for the very first time. This isn't a somber, solemn process. This is a political drive-by. They just want President Trump gone. But this never-ending march towards overturning the 2016 election has consequences, because you're telling 63 million voters that you don't respect their vote. Voters in states like mine, who not that long ago used to send Democrats to this august chamber, but recently have found no home in the Democratic Party, who feel that their values have been replaced by a liberal elitist agenda, who feel that partisan points are more important than practical solutions. Your never-ending impeachment quest is a constant reminder to them that you don't trust their judgment, you don't understand their way of life, and you couldn't care less about the issues that are important to them. As Chairman Nadler has so ominously stated, if you're serious about removing a president from office, what you're really doing is overturning the results of the last election. Well, they were serious. They spent the last 3 years talking about it, unwilling to accept the results of 2016. I wonder if my colleagues recognize the irony that their impeachment vendetta is the greatest election interference of all, and it was homegrown right here in the halls of Congress. And with that,
Members are reminded to address their remarks to the chair. Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, we reserve the balance for time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this time, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Zeldin.
The gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes.
This impeachment is an embarrassment for House Democrats. On the substance, Dems claim that their case is uncontested, relying on presumptions, hearsay, and 3% of the story, trying to connect dots that aren't actually connected. Some inconvenient truths. President Zelensky didn't know that there was a hold on aid until August 29th. The aid gets released shortly thereafter, and Ukraine didn't have to do anything in order to get that aid released. Now, President Zelensky says no demand, no quid pro quo, no pressure. But Democrats want the public to ignore the other 97% of the story. See, it doesn't work like that. Senate Democrats want new witnesses to show why there was a hold on aid. Odd request if you think you've already proven your case. Now, at the heart of this debate, two investigations are being discussed between countries. Democrats and media allies want the public to believe it's all just debunked that Ukrainians interfered in the 2016 election. They want you to ignore Avakov and Charlie's comments that Chalupa worked with the Ukrainian embassy, origins of the Steele dossier, the Black Ledger, and more. The problem with all of this is that the American public are smarter than Democrats are giving them credit for.
Next, the Democrats claim Republicans are arguing that it was Ukraine and not Russia that wanted to interfere and was interfering in the 2016 election. No, that is not what Republicans are saying. And of course, we have the Burisma-Biden issue of a corrupt Ukrainian energy company run by a corrupt Ukrainian oligarch hiring Hunter Biden at least $50,000 per month with no energy experience and no Ukraine experience solely because he is VP Biden's son. Now, the company wanted to hire Hunter Biden because they wanted to curry favor. There was this ongoing corruption investigation. Enter Joe Biden. He gets that prosecutor fired, threatening the loss of $1 billion if it didn't happen immediately, which it was. Now, Democrats believe Burisma and Biden should be immune from scrutiny. I disagree. Never again should that conflict of interest ever happen. And our governments should be working together to get to the bottom of all of this. This has also been a total disaster on the process, from getting a federal worker to file a whistleblower complaint to Schiff's version made up of the July 25th call. In closed-door interviews, Schiff was prosecutor, judge, jury, and witness coach. Every day, he loved getting America drunk on his favorite cocktail, 3 ingredients: cherry-picking leaks, withholding key facts, and misstating evidence. In the depositions and in the public hearings, the President Counsel was not invited to attend, present evidence, or cross-examine witnesses, and Republicans weren't allowed to call witnesses like Hunter Biden, Joe Biden, and many others. Then there was the House Judiciary debacle, where Schiff couldn't even show up to present his reports. He had to have one of his staffers present it for him. This impeachment is ripping our country in half. It's fatally flawed on the process, the substance, the intentions, and the consequences. It's a total Schiff show. I encourage all my colleagues to vote no.
Gentleman from California.
I thank the Speaker. We continue to reserve the balance of our time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Georgia.
Madam Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Meadows.
Gentleman's recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, today, as we sit here debating impeachment, you know, they all want to talk about it, the Constitution. It's Alexander Hamilton. You know, the last 30 days I've heard more about Hamilton from my Democrat colleagues, and until then, the closest they ever came to Hamilton was a $10 bill. I mean, you know, all of a sudden what we have is these strict constitutionalists on the other side of the aisle. Listen, this has nothing to do with the Constitution. It has nothing to do with anything but raw politics. You know, there's only one person on the other side of the aisle that got 7 Pinocchios for not telling the truth. No one on this side of the aisle got that during this impeachment process, Madam Speaker. And the American people need to understand 2 key facts. The Democrats in control set their own rules of evidence. They said what we need to do for impeachment is to have compelling evidence and bipartisan support. Well, they don't have either of those 2 things. They failed the rules that they made up themselves. We've got President Zelensky of Ukraine saying there was no pressure. We've got the number 2 guy in Ukraine saying there was no pressure. We've got the number 3 guy in Ukraine, no pressure. These are the supposed victims of this alleged crime. And yet here we are supposedly having this compelling evidence and facts when the best witness they have, the very best witness they had to change his testimony twice. They mentioned him 611 times. And ultimately, he said, I presume that that's what the president meant. You know, I can tell you that there are facts here to support it, but what is more important than that, Madam Speaker, is this. Because here we are today, we have bipartisan opposition to impeachment, not bipartisan support. You know, my colleagues opposite want the American people to think that this is a sad and somber day. Well, this is a sad day. It's a sad day for this institution because we've lowered the bar to impeach a president that continues to give us an economy that not only is growing, but growing at levels that we have never seen in the history of our country. When we look at unemployment at a level that is truly remarkable, they want to impeach. But it's another sad day because now what they're doing is they're telling the American people that 233 Democrats deserve to decide who the President of the United States should be and disenfranchise 63 million voters. when all is said and done, when the history of this impeachment is written, it will be said that my Washington Democrat friends couldn't bring themselves to work with Donald Trump, so they consoled themselves instead by silencing the will of those who did, the American people. And I yield back.
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I'm proud to recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Sherman, for 1 minute.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Robert Mueller lays out facts from 2017 that constitute obstruction of justice, but says the president cannot be indicted. Only Congress can apply all of those facts. Many of us have been talking about impeachment since those facts emerged in 2017. Of course, today we focus on more recent crimes. So why did we talk of impeachment back when a Republican-led Congress would not act? Why do we impeach today when a Republican-led Senate is unlikely to act? First, because it is our constitutional duty, no matter what the political consequences. Second, because it is the most effective tool to chasten and restrain a president who is not naturally feel constrained by the rule of law. I would note that the president's attempt to extort Ukraine was secretive and furtive, far different from his modus operandi of brazen threats that we saw in 2017. We can only imagine what high crimes and misdemeanors this president would have boldly committed had no one been talking about impeachment then, had he felt immune from impeachment. Today we will demonstrate that the president is not above the law.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It would have been nice if they had actually thought those crimes were bad enough to put in the articles. They didn't. I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Ratcliffe.
Gentleman's recognized for 3 minutes.
Madam Speaker, do you know who doesn't think the Democrats have presented enough testimony or evidence to impeach President Trump today? It's the Democrats. Sure, here in the House, Democrats running this inquiry have declared they've done everything needed. They have all the testimony and evidence necessary to impeach right now. But right now, down the hall, Democrats in the Senate are saying the exact opposite. They're complaining. They need more evidence and more testimony because Senate Democrats know that House Democrats have built them a house of cards impeachment. An impeachment built by the same Democrats who told America, trust us, President Trump committed treason. He's a Russian agent, and we've got evidence, which of course proved to be totally false. And to quote the favorite catchphrase of one member of this House, they got caught. Along the way, those same Democrats said, trust us. The FISA law and court weren't abused by the Obama administration using Democratic opposition research dossier against the Trump campaign and President Trump. Again, totally false, and again, they got caught. And when Democrats started this latest impeachment inquiry, they said, trust us. We have not yet spoken to the whistleblower. Again, totally false, and they got caught. Sadly, my Democratic colleagues have placed their own credibility in the hands of members of this body that have no credibility left, members that nobody trusts because they keep getting caught betraying America. But unless a bolt of courage and integrity strikes that side of the room in the next hour, history will reflect that Donald Trump is the third president to be impeached. History may also shortly reflect that he'll be the first president to be reelected after being wrongfully impeached. And if that happens, Democrats won't be able to hide behind a pretend veneer of caring about the Constitution. History will record the Democrats' legacy as a betrayal of the Constitution because the founders meant for impeachment to be used for actions so extraordinary, so rare that it's happened times in 2.5 centuries. It wasn't meant for congratulatory phone calls where there's no crime alleged, where there's no victim, and where the Democrats themselves couldn't even decide what to accuse the president of doing wrong before ending up with this embarrassment of a grab bag of abuse of power article. An obstruction of Congress, to even allege it, is an admission of constitutional illiteracy. The founders had a term for what the Democrats call obstruction of Congress. The founders called it the separation of powers. And the funny thing about obstruction, every time Democrats get caught trying to frame this president for some crime he didn't commit, they follow up by accusing him of obstructing their efforts to frame him for the things he never did in the first place. The founders warned and feared today might come when impeachment was used politically by the party that had the most votes.
Today, Democrats are the founders' worst nightmare come true. I think most Americans are probably wishing they could impeach the Democrats. To them, I say, you can next November. I yield back.
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I think when the history of this time is written, it will record that when my colleagues found that they lacked the courage to stand up to this unethical president, they consoled themselves by attacking those who did. I now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Takano, for a unanimous consent request.
Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record my remarks supporting the impeachment of President Donald Trump.
That objection is so ordered.
Madam Speaker, I request unanimous consent the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Clark, for her request.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record my remarks supporting my vote for the impeachment of Donald J. Trump.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Napolitano, for unanimous consent request.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record my remarks supporting the articles of impeachment against Donald Trump.
Without objection, so ordered.
Madam Speaker, the gentlelady from Ohio, Ms. Beatty, for unanimous consent request.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record my remarks supporting the impeachment of President Donald Trump.
Without objection, so ordered.
Speaker, I recognize the gentlelady from Virginia, Ms. Wexton, for a unanimous consent request.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record my remarks supporting the impeachment of President Donald Trump.
Without objection, so ordered.
Madam Speaker, I'm now proud to recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Pasquarello, for 1 minute.
Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, we're here today because of the failure of so many to cast aside narrow ambition to confront the threat standing before us. Offered the chance to investigate this government together, the President and his party stonewalled and obstructed. We're here today because they choose comfort over courage and avarice over the Republic. This is the ongoing tragedy of our age, and it is ongoing. The matter is now solely in our hands and belongs to us and us alone. The buck has stopped. Many have invoked the judgment of history as an antidote to this threat. But the threat to democracy is here today, not tomorrow. We need not, we must not await the verdict of time for Donald Trump's abuse of power and obstruction. We can offer that verdict right now, and we are.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan.
Gentleman's recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the gentleman. Madam Speaker, the Democrats forgot two key things. They forgot about the facts and they forgot about fairness. 4 facts will never change. We have the call transcript, no quid pro quo. We have the 2 guys on the call, excuse me, who've repeatedly said there was no pressure, there was no pushing. We have the fact Ukraine didn't know aid was held up at the time of the phone call, and most importantly, Ukraine took no action, no announcement of investigation to get the aid released. But Democrats don't care. They don't care about the facts, and they sure don't care about the process. No subpoena power for Republicans, no Republican witnesses. During the depositions, Republicans were prevented from getting all their questions answered, but Democrats got every one of their questions. The witness responded to every one of theirs, but not Republicans. The chairman wouldn't let him in. Of course, the whistleblower, the anonymous whistleblower with no firsthand knowledge, bias against the president, who worked for Joe Biden, was never compelled to testify. The guy who started it all. This is really about the president's been driving these guys because he's getting things done. He's doing what he said he was going to do. He's having results. Taxes have been cut, regulations reduced, unemployment at its lowest level in 50 years, the economy growing. Gorsuch and Kavanaugh on the court, out of the Iran deal, embassy in Jerusalem, hostages home from North Korea, and a new NAFTA agreement coming tomorrow. But guess what? When you drain the swamp fights back. And they started attacking the president before the election even. July 31st, 2016, they opened the Russia investigation. The FBI spied on 4 American citizens associated with the Trump campaign. The FBI took the dossier to the FISA court, the dossier they already knew was false. They took it to the court, and they lied to the court 17 times. Guess what? 3 days ago on national television, even Jim Comey had to admit the FBI was wrong. And yesterday, 1 day ago, the FISA court sends the FBI a letter and says, straighten up, get your act together when it comes to the FISA application process. Think about this. Think about this. The attack started then and they've continued right up till today. But I want you to think about something. The individual who said the FISA process was fine, the dossier was fine, the Russian investigation was fine, that same individual ran the impeachment process. That same individual's staff met with the whistleblower. That same individual is the only guy in Congress who knows who the whistleblower is for sure. And that same individual released the phone records of the president's personal attorney, released the phone records of a member of the press, and released the phone records of a Republican member of the United States Congress. This process has been unfair, it's dangerous, and it has been harmful to our country. Democrats have never accepted the will of the American people. Nancy Pelosi made that clear 4 weeks ago when she called the President of the United States an imposter. The will of we, the people, the 63 million folks who voted for this guy and made him president in an electoral college landslide. They've never accepted that fact. We are less than 11 months away from the election. Let the American people decide who should be president. Let the American people decide. I yield back.
Gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Schneider, for 1 minute.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise to defend the Constitution and support these articles of impeachment. The President abused the power of his office by corruptly putting his own political interests ahead of our nation's security. He blocked congressionally authorized military aid to coerce Ukraine to launch a phony investigation into his political rival. In the months since, he has waged a campaign of absolute obstruction against Congress's constitutional authority, ordering all federal officials to defy subpoenas and refusing to produce even a single document. Madam Speaker, I take no joy in today's impeachment vote or that the President's actions demand this response. This is a sad moment for our nation. Only twice before has the House voted to impeach a president, and never before on accusations of compromising our nation's security. I hope in the Senate, prosecution and defense can call and cross-examine witnesses, and the senators will hear the evidence and make their decisions without bias or prejudgment. This is a solemn moment, but our system of checks and balances was designed for times like these, and I have faith that our Constitution will guide us on the path ahead. I yield back.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Nunes.
Gentleman's recognized for
Thank
3
you, gentlemen.
minutes.
Madam Speaker, as the Democrats now admit, their attempt to remove the president began on Trump's inauguration day, when the Democrats' semi-official mouthpiece, the Washington Post, declared, "The campaign to impeach President Trump has begun." For years, the Democrats tried to expel the president with the preposterous accusation that he was a Russian agent. As detailed by I.G. Horowitz, dishonest intelligence officials used fake allegations spread by the Democrats to gain approval of a spying operation against the Trump campaign. As they falsely accused the Trump campaign of colluding with Russians, the Democrats themselves colluded with Russians to manufacture these allegations in the infamous Steele dossier. They even tried to get nude pictures of Trump from Russian pranksters. With the Russian collusion hoax, the Democrats had everything going for them. Federal investigations run by Trump haters, an endless supply of media cheerleaders, and a galaxy of left-wing interest groups amplifying their ridiculous message. And yet, even with all those weapons at their disposal, the Russia conspiracy theory collapsed. So they quickly concocted Plan B. The Ukraine hoax was based on a supposed whistleblower who colluded before with the Democrats. The Democrats then prevented Congress from interviewing the whistleblower while conducting bizarre, secret depositions and selectively leaking testimony to discredited media hacks. The Democrats showcased the most useful witnesses in public hearings that somehow reduced support for impeachment. It's not easy to make a coup attempt boring, but the Democrats found a way. As it turns out, the American people don't think a routine phone call with a foreign leader is a good basis for ousting a U.S. president. The Democrats also put forth ever-changing accusations against the president, including campaign finance violations, quid pro quos, election interference, bribery, extortion. Eventually, they ended up with the ridiculous charges we consider today: abuse of power, an utterly meaningless term, and obstruction of Congress. One Democrat has pronounced the president guilty simply because he won't cooperate with their plan to railroad him. But the only thing President Trump is guilty of is beating Hillary Clinton. The Democrats refused to accept that loss, and now they're indicating they'll continue their impeachment efforts even after this one fails in the U.S. Senate. Madam Speaker, after all their deceit, phony investigations, ginned-up crises, and manufactured outrage, the Democrats need a long period of rehabilitation. They must learn how to do something productive for the American people instead of ripping the country apart in their lust for power. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I thank the gentleman for his remarks, and it's now my pleasure to recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Chairman Neal, for 3 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is deeply unfortunate that we have to undertake this impeachment proceeding that unfolds this evening. But the part we play in this process is not optional. Among other things, as the Intelligence and Judiciary Committees have painstakingly documented, the President has indeed abused his authority, and he has indeed obstructed justice. He threatened to withhold congressionally appropriated U.S. taxpayer dollars from an ally under attack from Russia unless they agreed to interfere in our election on his behalf. He has expressed no remorse, and he continues to maintain that his behavior was, quote, perfect, while simultaneously obstructing legitimate congressional oversight and subpoenas and blocking members of his administration from providing truthful testimony to investigators. His actions are so far beyond the pale that they have left us with no remaining recourse except impeachment, and so we shall impeach. Because as drastic and as unwelcome as this step is, our country faces even greater long-term risk if we fail to respond. We cannot excuse a president who feels entitled to disregard or break the law with impunity. We are a nation built upon the rule of law, not the law rulers. The framers gave us their best effort in 1787, and indeed it was an extraordinary one. The Constitution they set down wasn't perfect, but it founded a republic that has endured and thrived with exceptional stability. As the late Senator Moynihan pointed out, only 2 countries in the world both existed in 1800 and have never had their governments changed by violence since then, the United States and Britain. Only 8 governments have existed since 1914 and have not had their form of government changed by force since then. The United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, South Africa, Sweden, and Switzerland. The innovative system of checks and balances that they constructed with the separation of powers brought about and successfully negotiated a generation of challenges that we have sustained. In the very first week that the framers began crafting this blueprint for America's freedom and stability, and negotiations indeed immediately started on impeachment. No government in the world at that time exposed the head of government to impeachment, but America was to be different. In the view of the framers, impeachment is in no way a constitutional crisis. It is a process that the framers wisely judged that we would sometimes need. This evening is one of those rare moments. Madison worried that one day the country would elect a president who, quote, might pervert his administration to a scheme of peculation or oppression. He might betray his trust to foreign powers, end of quote. George Mason asked the delegates, quote, shall we see any man to be above justice? And above all, shall that man be above it, then who can commit extensive injustice? End of quote. Of course not, because having just thrown off one king, they would never consent to anoint another one. America firmly rejected the notion of divine right. Speaker Rayburn summed it up, but I have 30 extra seconds, Mr. 30 extra seconds.
Without objection.
Thank the gentleman.
Gentleman's recognized.
Article 1 of the Constitution prescribes Congress as the first branch of government. And just as importantly, let me quote Speaker Rayburn, who was asked, how many presidents did you serve under? And Speaker Rayburn answered, none. I served with 7 presidents of the United States. Impeachment is reserved for moments of grave danger when the constitutional order
becomes dangerously out of balance, moments like this one, and that's why I will vote to impeach.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield a minute 45 to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Ferguson.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute 45 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, here we are on the verge of doing exactly what America doesn't want us to do and what they feared that you would do. In 2016, I, along with 63 million American voters, representing 304 electoral college votes, went to the polls and we raised our collective political middle finger to D.C. and voted for Donald Trump. Folks like my father who watched this place destroy his profession of community banking. My friends and family in the textile industry that saw their way of destroyed following NAFTA. Americans in rural areas whose opportunity in life and voice have been drowned out by the screams of socialist Democrats. Our friends and neighbors living in poverty and crime, broken down, project-based public housing, who for generations have been told by this place, this is the best that we think that you can do. Here's your check. God bless you. Now move along. Those voters. And now you want to remove our voice from office. Well, our voice will be heard, and I stand here determined to make sure that it will be, because we will fight back against this corrupt and unfair impeachment process. How dare you, the liberal elites, the condescending bureaucrats, and every other kind of swamp critter in this godforsaken place tell the American public who the president should be. That's the job of the American voter, not yours. This whole flipping goat rodeo is a sham and a shame, and it will not be forgotten. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I'm proud to recognize the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Heck, for 2 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Speaker, this week Americans are busy finishing up their Christmas shopping, mostly for their children, or if they're lucky enough to have them, their grandchildren. And high school and college students are taking final exams and sweating out the results. And that got me to thinking about the follow and what our obligation is to them. And that got me thinking about those who came before and how they might have seen their obligation to us. People like my grandfather, whom our family believes literally was born on the boat on the way over here from Germany. Or my father, who fought in World War II against the very people that his grandfather had left. We are all here today, all of us, because someone before us sacrificed so that they could journey here and build a new life in this unique land. And we are here today because those immigrants and their children were dedicated not just to the land of America, but to the idea, freedom and opportunity secured by self-government, choosing our own leaders in free and fair elections, and the rule of law under the Constitution.
Gentleman's time's expired.
2 minutes?
Madam Speaker, happy to yield another 30 seconds to the gentleman from Washington.
Gentleman's recognized.
This idea of America is in peril, brought about so by this president who sought to cheat in an election. A president who puts himself above the law and attacks the bedrock constitutional precept of checks and balances. Yet the question is, can America survive this behavior? What idea will we hand down to those who follow us? And finally, what is our obligation to those who would follow? It is simple: to do our duty, to defend the Constitution and the values underpinning it by voting yes on the articles of impeachment. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Georgia.
I reserve, Madam Chair.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from California.
Sure.
Madam Speaker, I'm proud to yield to the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Demings, for 2 minutes.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Speaker, we live in the greatest democracy in the world, and I am convinced that the overwhelming majority of Americans are good, decent people who work hard and play by the rules. But then we have people who have no respect for the law, people who have little regard for the rules, people who spend a lot of their time trying to figure out how to game the system. Law enforcement officers call them habitual offenders. And the more they get away with, the more likely they are to engage in misconduct. Some say it takes courage to hold powerful people accountable, but I see it differently. I see it as a sense of duty, a regular part of my job as a member of Congress. However, habitual offenders usually don't sneak up on you. They usually telegraph their intentions time and time again. On July 27th of 2016, in my home state of Florida, then candidate Trump said, "Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails, thereby inviting foreign interference into U.S. elections." But then the day after the special counsel testified before Congress, the president, feeling undeterred and emboldened, said, "Call President Zelensky," and pressured him to help him rig the elections, and chose to hold much-needed military aid over our allies' head until the president's demands were met. Now, I served 12 years on the hostage negotiations team, and I know that pressure and demands come in many forms. And in this scheme, we had both. I've enforced the laws, and now I write the laws. But the laws mean nothing if the accused can destroy evidence, stop witnesses from testifying, and blatantly refuse to cooperate. I ask you to name somebody in your community or your family who can do that. I know the president said that he can get away with anything he wants to. I come today to tell you that no, he cannot, because no one is above the law, and he shall be held accountable.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this moment, I yield for a unanimous consent request. The gentleman from Arkansas,
Gentleman's
Ms. Crawford.
recognized.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to enter my remarks into the record in opposition to this sham impeachment.
Without objection, so ordered. Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this time, I yield 4 minutes to the gentlewoman from Wyoming, Ms. Cheney.
Gentlelady is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Collins. Chamber, the very heart of our democratic republic. And I would imagine, Madam Speaker, that every one of us in this chamber, regardless of party, understands, shares a common view that being citizens of this great republic is among life's most tremendous blessings. We all know that no force on earth is more powerful than the force of freedom. It is our miraculous constitutional system, Madam Speaker, defended by our men and women in uniform, that has safeguarded that freedom for 230 years. Each one of us in this chamber bears a sacred duty, passed down to us through generations and affirmed in our oath of office, to preserve and protect our Constitution. Madam Speaker, our nation's framers recognized that this republic is fragile and that extreme partisanship can be among the most severe threats to its survival. That is why, in Federalist 65, Alexander Hamilton wrote, quote, "There will always be the greatest danger that the impeachment decision, will be regulated more by the comparative strength of parties than by real demonstrations of innocence or guilt." Here, Madam Speaker, our Democratic colleagues have been working to remove this president since the day he was elected, searching for an offense they could impeach. Failing to find one, Madam Speaker, they have decided to assume one. Rather than attempting to enforce their subpoenas in court, they have also decided to declare it a high crime and misdemeanor when the President of the United States asserts his constitutional privileges. The Democrats are asking members of this body to impeach, despite the fact that they have presented no direct evidence of any impeachable offense. Let me say it one more time, Madam Speaker. They have presented no direct evidence of any impeachable offense. If anyone in this chamber still believes the Democrats have proven their case, I would urge those members to ask the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, Mr. Schiff, why he failed to appear to answer questions about his report. Before members vote for impeachment, they might want to know why the author of the impeachment report will not defend it under questioning. If the House impeaches here, Madam Speaker, it will create exactly the type of risk the framers cautioned us to avoid. It will mean that divided government can imperil a democratically elected president based on unproven allegations and innuendo in the absence of direct testimony. Despite all the rhetoric you've heard today, Madam Speaker, passage of these articles of impeachment may permanently damage our. From this day forward, a hyper-partisan, bare majority can cite this precedent to try to remove a future commander-in-chief. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, Madam Speaker, think of our republic, think of the Constitution, think of the oath that we all swore to protect and defend that Constitution, and vote against these partisan, reckless, and dangerous articles of impeachment. I yield back.
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I'm proud to recognize the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin, for 1 minute.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, today we proclaim that no person is above the law, not even the President of the United States. Donald J. Trump abused the power of his office and violated his oath of office by extorting a new and inexperienced president of a vulnerable foreign ally to dig up dirt on Mr. Trump's domestic political opponents. He then obstructed the Congress, this equal branch of our government, from undertaking our duty, outlined in the Constitution itself, to investigate and check these violations. Today, we do nothing more and nothing less than fulfill our duty to our country and to our Constitution. Mr. Trump has allowed foreign powers to interfere in our domestic affairs. He has endangered our national security and our democracy itself. For those reasons, we must impeach this president. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield back.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Is it? Madam Speaker, at this point I have a yield for a unanimous consent request to the gentleman from Oregon.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd pose this resolution on impeachment and ask that my words be put in the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Madam Speaker, I have unanimous consent request from the gentleman from South Carolina.
Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, I oppose these resolutions. I ask for my comments to be admitted into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ask unanimous consent for the gentleman from Mississippi.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I oppose the articles of impeachment and like my comments be entered into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, reserve the balance of my time.
Who seeks recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask of the gentleman, is he ready to close?
No, we have a few more speakers.
Then I reserve.
Madam Speaker, I recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Espiat, for 1 minute.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, if you live in the village of Harlem in my district, you are not above the law. If you live on Webster Avenue in the Bronx part of my district, you are not above the law. If you live in Washington Heights, the immigrant neighborhood in my district, you are not above the law. So I submit to you that if you live on 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, you are not above the law, and you will be held accountable. President Donald Trump asked Ukrainian president to do us a favor and look into the Biden. That's abuse of power. President Trump used the official White House meeting to extort a Ukrainian president. That's abuse of power. President Trump ordered White House staff to withhold $400 million in aid to the Ukraine. That's abuse of power. President Trump and his staff defied multiple subpoenas from Congress. That's obstruction of Congress. He blocked witnesses from testifying before this body. That's obstruction of Congress. Nadie está por encima de la ley. No one is above the law. I cast my vote for this impeachment, articles of impeachment, and I ask my colleagues to do the same.
From Georgia.
Madam Speaker, I yield for unanimous consent request from the gentleman from Virginia.
Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to enter my statement into the record, recording that I am opposed to this articles of impeachment on the basis that they do not measure to Article 2, Section 4.
Yeah.
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I'm proud to recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Brownlee, for 1 minute.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, as the chair of the Women's Veterans Task Force, I see every single day the immense sacrifice our women veterans and all of our nation's veterans have made in service to our country, in service to our Commander-in-Chief, our Constitution, to protect our democracy, and for every single man, woman, and child in our country. When the President of the United States used $400 million meant to protect our national security in order to cheat in our elections, he not only abused his power, he turned his back on the sacrifices of our veterans and their families have made for all that we hold so dear. That abuse of power is reprehensible, and it is to prevent. We have a solemn duty to protect our Constitution, to protect our democracy, and to honor all those who have laid their lives on the line for these United States of America. I yield back.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this time, I yield for a unanimous consent request to the gentlelady from Indiana.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record my opposition to these articles of impeachment.
Without objection.
I reserve.
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I'm proud to recognize the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Davis, for 30 seconds.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Madam Speaker, make no mistake. We are not impeaching this president. He is impeaching himself. If you are the president and you obstruct justice, try to bribe a foreign leader, and threaten national, you're going to get impeached. End of story.
Yields back. Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this time, I recognize the gentleman from North Carolina for a unanimous consent request.
Gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I enter into the record my opposition to these articles of impeachment.
Without objection.
I reserve.
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I'm proud to recognize the gentlewoman from New Mexico, Ms. Holland, for 1 minute.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, for you as a representative of New Mexico, a place where we believe in dignity and respect for all. In Congress, I've been fighting for them. We've been working to make health care more affordable, education accessible, our country forward for the people. But today, this president has forced us into a serious debate. We're talking about a president who used the power of the presidency for his own political gain, our national security, and putting the integrity of the next election at risk. It's a sad day when a president shows complete disrespect for Congress as a co-equal branch of government and for the Americans who elected us. We collected the evidence and the facts are indisputable. We all took an oath to protect and defend our Constitution. We have the solemn responsibility to hold this president accountable because it's our job. Colleague, live up to our responsibility and show our fellow Americans that no one, not even the President, is above the law, and I yield.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this moment, gentleman from Oklahoma for unanimous consent request.
Gentleman's recognized.
Ask unanimous consent to enter into the record my opposition to these articles of impeachment.
Without objection.
And I reserve.
Gentleman from California.
Recognize the gentlelady from North Carolina, Ms. Adams, for a unanimous consent request.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record my statement in support of impeachment against President Donald J. Trump.
Without objection, so ordered.
I reserve the balance of our time.
Gentleman reserves.
Thank you, Madam
Gentleman
Speaker.
from
At this
Georgia.
time, I give 5 minutes to the gentleman from Louisiana, the majority whip, Mr. Scalise.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Impeaching a president of the United States. This isn't solemn duty tonight. Let's talk about what this is really about. This has been about a political vendetta. A political vendetta that didn't just start with the Zelensky call. It started long before that. Just listen to some of the quotes in this chamber. Pelosi, quote, on 22 months, actually, we cannot accept a second term for Donald Trump. What's more serious is that he can't win. This isn't about some crime. It's about fear that he might win re-election. That's not why you impeach a president. Al Green, quote, I'm concerned that if we don't impeach this president, he will be elected. The list on, Madam Speaker. In fact, some quotes that I can't even read on the House floor that some of our colleagues made. And keep in mind, more than 100 Democrats on this House floor to impeach this president with the Zelensky phone call. Just get some of the articles of impeachment that they for. 2 years ago, 58 Democrats voted to impeach the president over comment made about NFL players kneeling pledge of allegiance. Impeach the president, or 50 Democrats voted to impeach him for that. Just this summer, over 90 impeachment for comments he made about the squad. So he makes comments about some other Congress who make a lot of comments about, and 95 members vote each the president of the United States. This is a political vendetta. It has nothing to do with credit. There was no crime. And why do the witnesses? Obviously, we weren't able to call all as we wanted, but there were witnesses. In fact, Gordon Sutton, U.S. ambassador to the European Union, he's mentioned over 6 times in the Schiff report. He was there. And he say, when, quote, did President Trump ever allow any preconditions for anything? His answer, no. No. Any precondition for the aid to be released? No. Any precondition for a White House meeting on the testified? No. Abuse of power. Let's talk about that article of impeachment, Madam Speaker. Washington law professor Turley, who voted against Donald Trump, spoke to this claim of abuse of power. In fact, he said, if you make a high misdemeanor out of going to the courts, it is and power. It's your abuse of power. You are doing personally what you are criticizing the president of doing. Abuse. There's a House rule, Madam Speaker, requires not a lot requires that the minority get a hearing, which we asked for multiple times. They broke this. They didn't allow us to have a 40-day hearing. They didn't want to hear about this case because it was never because there was no crime. It is about a personal political vendetta. Now let's talk about obstruction of Congress as they make up these to impeach a president because they didn't find they were looking. It's been an impeachment in search of a talk about obstruction of Congress and saying the president after subpoena. Let's go through the Department of State they subpoenaed. Literally just 4 days after the Secretary of State himself responded to your subpoena. Department of Defense, a week later, responded to the Department of Energy, responded to the subpoena We can go on with all his agencies. That's an obstruction of Congress. Respond to your subpoena. That's what they did. They responded. You might not have liked answer. That's not the way this works. Impeach a president because you don't foreign policy. So many of those policy experts testified. But this isn't just Donald Trump. They don't just Donald Trump, Madam Speaker. They hate the 3 million Americans for this president. The forgotten men of this country who had been left behind, Madam Speaker.
House will be in order. And may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's forgotten men and women's country that Washington had left behind. And what's the president doing for them? He's covering them. 600 jobs in Pennsylvania, 1,000 jobs in Ohio, $750 million investments, 100 new jobs across this country. Detroit, Chrysler, 6,500 jobs. That this president is doing for those men and women who had been left behind. It's about time somebody stands up for him. President Trump is. So it is a political vendetta. But if they go through with this, Madam Speaker, impeach will not just be a state Democrat majority. Impeach will be their legacy. I yield.
Reminded to address the remarks. Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, recognize Ms. Custer from New for unanimous consent request.
Please recognize.
Speaker, I request the consent, unanimous consent for enter my statement into the 7th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge in favor of articles of impeachment. Thank you.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, it is now my pleasure to recognize the gentleman from Maryland, Majority Leader of the House of Representatives, Mr. Hoyer, for 1 minute.
Gentleman's recognized. The gentleman will suspend. The House will come to. Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, I have had the honor of serving in this for over 30 years. I've served during 6 presidencies. I've been through moments of progress and terrible tragedy. I've seen rank partisanship and patriotic bipartisanship. I've seen a two-party system, and I've seen it break down. Never, in all my years of serving in this great institution that I love, and the people of my district, did I ever expect to encounter such an obvious wrongdoing by a President of the United States. Nor did I expect to witness such a craven rationalization of presidential actions, which have put our national security at risk, undermined the integrity of our elections, and defied the constitutional authority of the Congress to conduct oversight. We've heard from Republicans that this impeachment really has to do with policy differences or how we feel personally about the president, about his temperament, or that we simply dislike him. Throughout the Trump presidency, Democrats have resisted pursuing impeachment, even as we watched with dismay and disgust at a pattern of wrongdoing. That pattern included ordering federal agencies to lie to the public, firing the FBI director for refusing to end investigations of Bain,
siding with Vladimir Putin against our intelligence agencies, taking funding away from the military to put towards an ineffective border wall, and setting policies that have led to the separation of families and caging of children. We have to be sure deep disagreements with the policies and actions taken by this president. There's been a lot of talk about the 63 million people who voted for Mr. Trump. Little talk about the 65 million people who voted for Hillary Clinton. The policy difference, or those votes, this president was elected legitimately.
The House will stay in order. The gentleman deserves to be heard. Gentleman's recognized.
Because we have an electoral college. But none of these are reasons to pursue what Chairman Schiff has called a wrenching process for the nation. In fact, Democrats rejected that process emphatically in 3 specific votes. In December of 2017, Democrats overwhelmingly voted against pursuing articles of impeachment, including the Speaker and myself. We did so again in 2018, with over 60% of the Democrats rejecting pursuing articles of impeachment. And again, just months ago, in July of 2019, 60% of the Democrats said no to pursuing articles of impeachment. Just days before the infamous July 25th telephone call. We did the same with 60% of Democrats voting not to proceed. Credible witnesses, many of whom were appointed to office by President Trump, have corroborated the details and timeline of his abuse of presidential power, which forms the basis of the first article of impeachment in this resolution. Instead, I will not recount all of the witnesses that have occurred. I congratulate my colleagues and Mr. Nadler and his committee and Mr. Schiff and his committee for setting forth a compelling case. They've been laid out fully in the articles before us and by colleagues in their remarks. What I will do is remind Americans that the House provided President Trump every opportunity to prove his innocence, but the witnesses were precluded from coming forth. The witnesses who have personal knowledge did not come, either at the President's request, in which he refused to show up because he thought it was a sham, as so many of you have said, or to the committees. Instead, he ignored congressional subpoenas for documents and for testimony by White House officials and ordered his subordinates not to cooperate. Perhaps they could have exonerated him. This itself, I suggest to you, is unprecedented. When President Nixon and Clinton were asked to hand over documents and allow officials to testify, ultimately both complied, because it is the law. Such actions of the President can be taken as further evidence of his obstruction and abuse of power. It is, in and of itself, impeachable. subject of the second article of impeachment. These two articles before us concern two very profound constitutional issues about the abuse of power in our republic. First, whether it is acceptable for the President of the United States, any president, to solicit foreign interference in our elections. There is a difference as to whether he's done that, and the place to try that is in the United States Senate. But we believe strongly there is probable cause to conclude that. To undermine our national security, the integrity of our elections, and the integrity of our democracy. And secondly, whether it is permissible for the President to obstruct Congress and act as if he is above the law and immune from constitutional oversight. On December 4th, the Judiciary Committee heard the testimony of constitutional law experts who weighed in on these points. With employee pricing, 100 historians have said the same thing. As Professor Noah Feldman said, if we cannot impeach a president who abuses his office for personal advantage, we no longer live in a democracy. We live in a monarchy, or we live under a dictatorship. The votes we are about to take concern the rule of law and our democracy itself. Let us not forget the words of John Locke, so influential to the founders of our republic. John Locke, millennia ago, said this: wherever law begins. This impeachment asks whether we are still a republic of laws, as our founders intended, or whether we will accept that one person can be above the law. In America, as we have said over and over again, no one is above the law, but only as long as we hold every person accountable for breaking the law, even a president.
This is a CBS News special report. I'm Norah O'Donnell in Washington, rejoining our coverage of the House impeachment. The countdown is on. Members will soon cast votes on two articles, abuse of power and obstruction of Congress, because in a matter of moments, President Donald Trump could soon become the third U.S. president to be impeached. Let's listen in now to Steny Hoyer.
We did not wish for it. We voted against it. We voted against it once. We voted against it twice. We voted against it 3 times as recently as July. We did not want this. However, President Trump's misconduct has forced our constitutional republic to protect itself. These votes that we are about to take and the process that will follow in the Senate are not only an assessment of the President's commitment to the Constitution or to his oath of office, it is, as well, a test of our own. Damning evidence of the President's high crimes has emerged. Nevertheless, Republican members of this House and of the Senate have continued to defend a president whose actions seem to many of us to be indefensible. All of us feel a sense of loyalty to party. It's what makes our two-party system function. It's what helps hold presidents and majorities accountable. But party loyalty must have its limits. And as evidence of the president's impeachable offenses have mounted daily as the witnesses testified, it has become increasingly clear that the limits of partisanship have been reached and passed. Now Democrats and Republicans together before our constituents, our countrymen, and our Creator. The New York Times on October 18th summarized the question now posed to House and Senate, Republicans and Democrats. Compromise by compromise, Donald Trump has hammered away at what Republicans once saw foundational virtues: decency, honesty, responsibility, and yes, even civility. Going on to say, will they commit themselves and their party wholly to Mr. Trump, embracing even his most anti-democratic actions? Or will they take the first step towards separating themselves from him and restoring confidence in the rule of law? Madam Speaker, we have seen Republican courage throughout our history, from the Civil War to the Cold War. In 1950, Margaret Chase Smith, the senator from Maine, a Republican, spoke bravely against the cancer of McCarthyism in her party. 6 of her Republican colleagues in a declaration of conscience against their own leadership. We are Republicans, but we are Americans first. In 1974, one Congress brave, principled step of becoming the first Republican on the Judiciary Committee to support impeaching President Nixon. And to the country, and I quote, "It isn't easy for me to align myself against the President, to whom I gave my enthusiastic support, on whose side I've stood in many legislative battles. In foreign and domestic affairs, I've consistently applauded. But it is impossible," he went on to say, "for me to condone or ignore the long abuses to which he has subjected the presidency and the people of this country. The Constitution and my own oath of office," he said, "demand faith and allegiance to the principles of law and justice upon which this nation was founded." And he concluded, "and in good conscience, turn away from the evidence of evil that is to me so clear and compelling." My colleagues, that congressman's name was Larry Hogan, Sr. He represented the 5th District of Maryland, which I now represent. His son is presently the 2nd-term Republican governor of our state. When Larry Hogan Sr. died in 2017, every obituary led with praise for his act of political courage. Who among us, many years from now, will receive such praise as a man or woman of courage? Who will regret not having earned it? We've talked a lot about partisan differences. There is one person who has spoken today who is neither a member of the Republican Party nor the Democratic Party. His name is Justin Amash, who represents a Republican district. He left the Republican Party, and in doing so, he admonished his colleagues that, quote, "This president will only be in power for a short time. His behavior will forever tarnish your name. He spoke on this floor in support of the two articles that we will consider this evening. Neither a Democrat nor a Republican. Representative Amash, of course, is the only member of this House who has no allegiance to either party, but to his country. He is supporting, as I've said, both articles. We need not ask who will be the first to show courage by standing up to President Trump. The question we must now ask is, who will be the last to find it? The pages of our history are filled with Americans who have the courage to choose country over party or personality. But as President Kennedy wrote, the stories of past courage can teach. They can offer hope. They can provide inspiration. But they cannot supply courage itself. For this, President Kennedy said, each man, each woman must look into their own soul. I urge my fellow colleagues in the House and, yes, in the Senate to look into your soul. Summon courage to vote for our Constitution and our democracy. I understand we will all not see the same conclusion, but to do less betrays our oath and that of our founders, who pledged their lives, their fortune, and their sacred honor. Let us either turn away from the evidence, which to me seems so clear, nor from our good conscience, which compels us to do what in our hearts we know to be right. Let us not allow the rule of law to end or for tyranny to find its toehold. With our votes today, we can bear true faith and allegiance to the vision of our founders, and we can show future generation what it truly means to be Americans. Vote yes.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Georgia.
Madam Speaker, a few weeks ago, just off of this floor, I said that a dark cloud was descending, and today, because of the clock and the calendar, it is closing. It is amazing to me what I just heard from the Majority Leader, that Mr. Schiff and Mr. Nadler presented a compelling case for impeachment. If for impeachment, I'm not sure why we're here right now. It is not anywhere close to compelling. But you know what is interesting is what I have heard today. The Majority Leader just spoke and said that if the President was given every opportunity to come prove his innocence. I tell you what, Madam Speaker, let me have just a few minutes, stop the clock, and let me go around to the press corps and to everybody here, and I'm going to accuse you of something. You did it. You did it. You did it. You did it. Now prove it's wrong. You did it. Guess what? You don't want to, because deep down you know that that's turning the entire jurisprudence of this country upside down. You are guilty. You're not guilty until you're proven. You're innocent. And today from this floor, we have heard the Majority Leader say this President is guilty and not the other way around. He is innocent, and these come nowhere close to proving it. But what is left of this body? Let's have an honest conversation, Madam Speaker. What we have found over the past few weeks is it is okay for the majority to tear down a foreign leader because they can't make their weak or worse, or as it was called in the committee, even look like a battered wife. It is below the dignity of this body and this majority to tear down a foreign leader because they can't make their case against this one. We have broken rules in this House. Even to this moment, Chairman Schiff and the others have broken House Resolution 6, the things they should be turning over. I still have not got a transcript. We still don't know what we got, and the White House still has not got their stuff. I guess minority hearing rule days don't matter either. You see, there is a problem here, because we're going to vote this tonight while breaking the rules. What a shameful incident. But we also found already right. We saw the rise of partisanship because of things that have been done even further. And we've even seen members smeared in reports by drive-by political hacks when they matched numbers of the majority or the ranking member press. That also concerns every one of you as much as it concerns every one of us. Nothing but a drive-by hit. But you know something? This majority leader also just said, wherever law ends, but I will say this, in this House, wherever the rules are disregarded, chaos and mob rule actually begin, and the majority has taken that to a new level. It has been said today, where is bravery? I'll tell you where bravery is found in this minority who has lived through the last year of nothing but rules being broken, people being put down, questions not being answered, and this majority say, be damned with anything else, we're going to impeach and do whatever we want to do. I guarantee you, one day you'll be back in the minority, and it ain't going to be that fun. Because when you look at it, when you actually trash the rules of this House, you ought to really look at what did you gain at the end. You claim to love. That's the things we found out so far. But you know, they're really careful of saying, oh, you want to deal in process and process. As I said last night in the Rules Committee, where they didn't want to listen, I'll win on process facts because we have the truth on our side. Let me remind you that here's what the process actually says. There was no pressure. Look at the call. President Zelensky, President Trump, no pressure. There was nothing done to get the aid, and the aid actually came. There were 5 meetings. But when you look at it right now, none of which matter, because right now the dark cloud is descending upon this House. Speaker, when I look out in that abyss, I don't know what I see, but I tell you what I do see. I see coming off a president who will put his head down even through this sham impeachment, and he will put the American people first. He will tell them that I care about you. He will still put the economy first, and he will make sure this country stands strong. That's where we're going. And Madam Speaker, it is with that hope in the future that I recognize right now that I yield 1 minute to the Republican from California, Mr. McCarthy.
Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, I must warn you, I'm about to say something my Democratic colleagues hate to hear. Donald J. Trump of the United States. He is president today. He'll be president tomorrow. Be present when this impeachment is over. Madam Speaker, when they accept that, maybe this House can get back to work for the American people. Now, tonight I rise in opposition to this impeachment, or as the elected representative from the Central Valley of California. I rise as Kevin McCarthy, citizen, no better, no worse than the 135 representatives that are in this chamber, or the 330 million Americans watching this institution make what I believe to be one of the worst decisions. It doesn't matter whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, whether you're liberal or you're conservative, whether you're the first generation or the 10th, at our core, we are all Americans. We choose our future. We choose what kind of nation we want to be. Here is our choice tonight. Will we let impeachment become an exercise of raw political power if it damages our country? Or will we protect the proper grounds and process for impeachment now and in the future? For months, in the media have attempted to normalize the impeachment process that would remove a duly elected president from office. Breathless, baseless outrage. This is their last attempt to stop the Trump presidency. Madam Speaker, Speaker Pelosi, even the Democrats have been working on this impeachment for 2.5 years. Those were her words, they were not mine. To him in 2016, they'll do anything or say anything to stop him in 2020. That's not America. That's not how democratic republics behave. Elections matter. And in 11 months, people's voice will be heard in. Impeachment is the consequential decision Congress can make sending our men and women to war. 5 days ago, Speaker Pelosi impeached the President of the United States. She scripted and created an artificial line to make the detail. Why else are we doing this for Christmas? If that was a rush to judgment, he could be forgiven. Before the Speaker's word or one shred of evidence, she moved to him. In the past, body, such a step demanded a vote from all of us. But not only did she get this House and the hundreds of millions of people we represent a say in whether to do an impeachment inquiry, she threw out bipartisan standards, gave President Nixon. That's why I immediately sent Speaker Pelosi a letter asking her to follow of history and follow those that have served America well. What did she say? She rejected it. She rejected it because the democratic process would crumble their case. A fair process exposed to the American public what many knew. Democrats have wanted to impeach President Trump since the day he was elected. In their way, certainly not the truth. Madam Speaker, Chairman Schiff said he had evidence and circumstantial of collusion. That's January, where we all in this body, we stood against our hands, we swore that we'd have the Constitution. And a few mere hours after he said he was going to impeach the mother effer. Those are not my words. A year before, Chairman Adler campaigned the Democrats that he wanted to be chairman of the Judiciary Committee where impeachment is. New York Times writes, Speaker, because strongest member to lead impeachment. And Koskin, a leading Democrat Judiciary Committee, one that represented Rules Committee for these articles today. Trout would impeach President Trump 2 days before he was ever sworn. What we've seen is a rigged process that partisan and least credible impeachment in the history of America. That is this legacy. Any president in this country would be such blatant bias. Especially the prosecutor was the fact witness, the judge and the jury. Madam, Democrats haven't just failed on process, also failed on evidence. A lot of debate on this floor today. But I heard one member of this body just fact. President Trump provided lethal aid to Ukraine. It came before the call, it came after the call, and it continued today. Trump provided Ukraine tank bombs. The previous minute, they gave blankets. This is truth. Meanwhile, the Democrats' case is based on hand opinions and hearsay. Simply put, there are no grounds. As constitutional Jonathan Turner, I would challenge to say he's probably the most respected, and we all. A Democrat who did not vote for the president, under oath, there was no extortion, no obstructions, and no abuse of power. Based on the facts, truth, Hurley called this the fastest, weakest impeachment in the U.S. Such a definitive be the end of all of this. But Speaker Pelosi with this impeachment, without evidence of fact or true public support. The Speaker says it is agents who are founders. On this, I agree with the Speaker. We should be founders. And if one very clear that this impeachment is unfounded and improper. In the Federalist, Alexander wrote, there would always be this danger that impeachment be driven by partisan entity instead of real demonstration of innocence or guilt. That impeachment would be driven by partisan animosity instead of real relations. James Madison, another author of those papers, wrote, the danger of legislative abuse must lead to the same need as is threat executive abuse. The founders did not want it to be used for political partisan battles. If my colleagues do not want to follow constitutional for doing a national election, you could have followed Speaker Pelosi's standard, at least the one she followed back. It's a very sensible standard. She's so divisive, overwhelming, compelling, and partisan. Not one of those criteria today. Based on the facts, based on the evidence, based on the truth, Eve fails that Pelosi test. Those